I'm Angela Howard. I was born in Grenada in the West Indies and came up to the United States in 1968, moving to Brooklyn first and then to Queens, etc. I work in the construction industry. I build shelter for homeless and youth. So that's me.
My name's Jona Inniss. I'm 20 years old. I've lived in Brooklyn my whole life. I am an anthropology major, and I am about to be a senior in college, so I am looking at the next step of what I'm going to do next.
So I bought a house in 1998, and she was born into that house, so that's the only house that she knows. When we first emigrated to the States, we lived here in Brooklyn in various areas in the Flatbush and East Flatbush area. So I've seen it, left, came back. I wanted to reconnect to like my West Indian Caribbean community in some way. We were living in Borum Hill before this, and I wanted to live somewhere where I could get the food that I like. I wanted to live somewhere where people said hello in the morning, and then I moved here, and then it changed again anyway because it started to gentrify. But I wanted to get back to like Caribbean Brooklyn, if you will.
I was very lucky living on our block because there were a lot of kids my age. So we all grew up together, and we would play outside together. We would pretty much do everything. Anything that kids would do in the playground, we would just do in the street. We'd play ball, we'd go on scooters, bikes, things like that. And there was a community of kids and parents that was really nice. I remember the first time it snowed, like everyone from the block just went sledding for the first time.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of memories that I think are very important in my formative years because of that aspect of being allowed to be outside and just playing with kids my age.
Yeah, in general, I think what happened on our block, which was a nice, unique block, was that when people started buying homes, they bought them largely from widows or people who were downsizing. So there was a long period of time where new families were moving in. We still have older families and older people on the block, so we speak with them as well. We check on them, shovel their snow, etc. So it really feels like a community on our block, and I think that's one of the nicer things. And when people moved in, they just jumped into that as a community. But it was a lot more like older people selling homes because they needed to downsize, or it's hard to age in place in a house that has all these stairs. So more people moved in, but I think there's a balance. We have a neighbor who's like 92, another one who's in her 90s as well. It just keeps on transitioning, but not too quickly. I play in a steel band from the Caribbean, from the island of Trinidad. The steel band is from an instrument that's made of an oil drum, and we have traditionally had a big competition on Labor Day weekend during the West Indian Day Parade, etc. festivities. A band can be like 100 people or so. There are several bands in New York City. There are fewer than there were. Like when we were at our height, there were probably 16 bands, like large bands in New York. And a couple years in a row, we practiced on Parkside between Nostrand and Rogers, and like 4 bands practiced on that street, and they shut it down. And they actually called it Pan Alley for a while. They got a street sign and called it Pan Alley. But I do that, and when she decided she wanted to play, she plays as well. And her dad plays too, so
Yeah.
We are a family that plays together. Yeah. I started playing, it's something that I always wanted to do. I started playing in 1996. Her dad started playing when he lived in Trinidad when he was like 7, around that age as well. And I just never stopped playing. And then when she came along, I tried to make sure that she understood that she didn't have to play if she didn't want to, but she kind of grew up in it because you practice every night in the summertime. So she was always around it. And then she decided she wanted to play. I think for me, several things have changed. One is the scale of the neighborhood has changed. Like, the apartment buildings that are coming in are bigger. They just ripped out the last grocery store. There are things like that are physical that have changed. And I'm going to say, for me, there also felt like there was a point in time where people who didn't necessarily appreciate the community vibe moved in. I started calling them the Manhattan people. Like, you walk past them and they don't say good morning, and you're like, well, what happened to you? So that changes the personality of the area, because then you don't know who you should say hi to or who would look at you like you're crazy. Eventually, more and more things close because they can't keep up with the retail element of it, and they can't keep the rent. There was a Haitian bakery near us for a while, and they were one of maybe 3 stores, but then someone asked such an extraordinary rent from them that they had to close. So it's things like that you don't notice it at first, probably, if you're not paying attention, and then insidiously you look up and there are bagel stores but not places to get a roti, and that's just part of the neighborhood changing. There's all kinds of interesting things that people are trying, but it's fascinating to watch because you wonder, well, where'd the market for this come from? And it's that new people come and they want to hang out. There are places where people sit on the corner and like drink wine. One of the places near us used to be a funeral home.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
And now they sell. And now it's a restaurant.
So it's so funny to me because I would walk past the funeral home all the time. It was
House of Hills.
House of Hills.
It was the House of Hills.
It was the House of Hills funeral home, and then it became a taqueria.
At first,
and then it was really good, and then it became Gilu.
Right.
And so it's so funny that you say that because now it's been so long since the
it was a funeral home,
closed,
right?
Then now I actually do associate it as Gilu.
Right. But I think of it as, what happened to Tacos de los Muertos? Because we renamed it. We were like, how do you eat tacos in a place where there were dead people? So we called it Tacos de los Muertos. That wasn't the name. And then like this other place comes, and now there are people sitting drinking a glass of wine and eating pizza, and it's just
like
so
funerals,
And we used to see funerals there, so it just everything changes, and you get that, and it is important to know that change is inevitable, and I think we do understand that. But every so often you look up and you're like, well,
how did this end up here? Yeah.
If I were to describe Flatbush, though, I would think of Flatbush as like standard Brooklyn. Right.
Yeah,
it is mad Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
It is authentically Brooklyn. Because it's a mishmash of things, right? It's not one thing anymore, but it never was that one thing. It was the place that you could get 10-cent bagels as well as getting a roti. It's the same thing now. You can go to a Thai restaurant and you can, get a different roti or something like that. But Brooklyn is so diverse. I mean, Queens is as well, right? But Brooklyn is so everybody on top of one another diverse and just trying to figure it out. And I think that's what Flatbush is.
So I usually just describe it as the place I grew up, because that's how I have to explain it to people where I meet them at school or anything like that. Oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Brooklyn. I'm from a small neighborhood in Brooklyn. But what I usually try to use as their marker is I just describe it as the place where the West Indian Day Parade is, because that's my connection to it. We live on the Juve route.
Yeah.
And on that weekend, we're pretty much close to everything, and that's one of the biggest events, or it was one of the biggest events
before
Brooklyn before COVID.
Before COVID.
And no matter who you would speak to, people know that it that it exists and that it's around. So if I just say, oh, I live in that area, then they have a sense of where I'm from.
Community connects us to the neighborhood. Every so often I think to myself, where would you go? And first of all, we have amazing neighbors, right? So that's one thing. We have amazing neighbors that are friends. We our immediate neighbors on one side of us, we don't even have a fence between us because we just figured it wasn't necessary, and that worked out well. We have people who we have a basket of keys in our house, to other people's houses, whoever gets locked out or who needs cats or dogs or animals fed or, stuff like that. And that feels hard to replicate. So community is one thing. Certainly the Caribbean community of it is another thing.
Not only is it community-based, but you feel like people are looking out for you no matter where you are. I can walk anywhere, I feel. And I feel like I'll be safe, just because I know that there are people around that are looking out for me, people who I might not know as well, but have seen me walking down Nostrand my whole life. They know who I am. They know the people who have raised me. So there's like that watchful eye somewhere that if anything were to happen, they could intervene.
It's rare, actually, I think, in this day and age. Like, I feel like that's something that lived in my day and age, and that we've been able to preserve it in some way, shape, or form. Like, when I was a kid, you actually played in the street, right? Because there was so little car traffic that you just had to call out when a car was coming down the block.
We were able to do that.
You did it once in a while, but like, there's a lot more car traffic on our block now than there was when I was growing up.
I wouldn't feel comfortable playing in the street now.
Yeah, no, we played stickball in the street. You know what I mean? Like, we played actual games that could go relatively uninterrupted until a car came, and then you had to say, okay, car, and then, you know, the car came, and then you went back to what you were doing. And that just, you don't see that now in the same way. Parking is a mess in our neighborhood now because there's so many cars. Like, where did all these vehicles come from? The park and the museum and the gardens are right here. Like, that is one of the most amazing, accessible things about this neighborhood in Brooklyn, that you have like an opportunity for different dimensions of culture, right, literally at your feet. When she was small, I used to bring her to the museum so that she could walk around, like during the weekdays when there was nobody there, so that she could learn to walk unencumbered. And it just seemed like a simple thing to do. We could be inside and all that. And she spent a lot of time in the parks.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Prospect Park growing up. It's a nice place to be. It's a really nice place to be. And the gardens are beautiful too. I had my prom in the gardens, and it felt so special to me. I mean, I went to school in Park Slope, and I know that everyone, they grew up in the gardens as well. But just to be 3 blocks away from some place that, like, I spent a lot of time.
Yeah, no limo involved or anything. Like, here.
Just like, okay.
She was like, I could walk to prom.
I walked back from prom. Yeah, wow. Me and my friends, because we went to my house after. I was like, okay, guys, like, we don't want to be here anymore, so let's just go to my house.
Oh, for me, it's got to be community.
Yeah,
it's got to be community. Flatbush feels like community. It feels like people who, I mean, there are ups and downs like in any neighborhood, but it feels like people who are pulling in the same direction in general.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I genuinely agree. I think because people try to stay here for as long as they can, they open themselves up more to what's around them, and they take in what's going on. So the garden, like the community garden, things like that, I think people want to put an effort and give back to, like, just like the space and the earth that's around here.
I don't want it to be stuck in time, but I want Flatbush to take everybody with it on its ride, on its journey. I don't want it to leave anybody behind on its journey. Like, there are elderly people who have lived their lives here. The extent to which they can stay here and live out peacefully the last of their days, I want them to be able to do that. There are people who emigrated to the States, you know, ages ago, and have lived in the same apartment. I want them to be able to stay here, like, unharassed for as long as they want to stay here. As the neighborhood changes, there's nothing wrong with it changing, and I want people to feel like they own it and that they partake of everything that is available to them in Flatbush, because Flatbush is an interesting neighborhood.
It is an interesting neighborhood, and I think for people to not feel excluded of anything new coming in as well, I would rather someone come in and say, okay, this is what everyone else is doing. Where do I fit into this, and where can I add on without taking over? So, affordable grocery stores. The Associated closed a few months ago. I came back home and the Associated was closed. And it's an affordable grocery store. There's a parking lot. Like, people can go there, do their weekly shops, and they'll be good. However, the Lincoln Market is so expensive. And it's not a place where I think people can sustainably buy food for their home. The only place right now that I think that people can choose between is Lincoln Market and Key Food on
Winthrop and Nostrand.
Yeah. And they're very different. And I mean, every time I have to go to Lincoln Market, I'm like, okay, I have to be prepared to lose
Yeah, you have to
all of my savings for things that
For staples.
for staples,
For basics. Yeah.
Whereas at Associated, it's just like a quick zip around the block.
Well, and it's not sustainable in the long run.
In the long run,
I
it
think
really isn't.
You're probably right about the food thing, because that's
I'm
what
worried
will
that it'll
transform
become-
the neighborhood.
Yeah,
right?
and I'm worried that it'll become a food desert.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will per se, but if people keep taking away the grocery
quality
store-
food
the
options.
quality food
Yeah.
options,
Yeah. I think that. I also think I just want to make sure people feel safe in their neighborhood. We have always like walked through here at any hour of the day or night, and that feels great, you know, to be able to do that and to not look around your shoulders. So I want it to feel as safe as it has for me for decades. And I'm not really sure how you accomplish that, but I'd like to make sure that it's accomplished.